they speeded up the mortgages, the car loans, everything they did was faster. And then they launched a program calling themselves the Fast Moving Bank. And income rapidly doubled in 3 years. But you know you got a winner when you see this idea, this concept, the Fast Moving Bank, on the cover of the United Jersey Annual Report. You know, one of the big examples of this idea of what to do if you're shooting for number 2 is Pepsi-Cola. See, Coke is the leader, but Coke is a 110-year-old product, 110 years old. Now, what's the weakness if you're 110 years old? Well, your parents drank Coca-Cola. So what Pepsi-Cola said is, you don't want to drink the same stuff that your parents drank, do you? You're the Pepsi generation. And the kids and the younger people reacted to that tremendously. And where Coke used to outsell Pepsi 2-1 today, Coke outsells Pepsi in the United States about 10-9. Pepsi is a very close number 2 brand. So that's what you got to do. If you really want to be number 2, what you have to do is the opposite of what the leader does. That's the law of the opposite. The next law is the law of line extension. There's an irresistible pressure to extend the equity of the brand. Everybody wants to take their name and put it on everything. Take Scott Tissue, for example. Scott was the #1 brand of toilet tissue. So what did they do with the Scott name? They put it on napkins, they put it on towels, they put it on nose tissue, they put it on everything. And today, Scott is no longer the #1 toilet tissue. Charmin is. Try this. Think of it as a shopping list. Let's say I have a shopping list and I go to the supermarket on Saturday. If it says Coca-Cola, I know what to buy. I buy those little brown bottles. If it says Kleenex, I buy nose tissue. If it says Charmin, I buy toilet tissue. But what do I buy if it says Scott? And what part of the body do I use it on when I get it home? Scott is well known, but Scott doesn't stand for anything. When you put your name on everything, your name loses its power. And yet, most companies today do that. They try to think of all the crazy things they can put their name on. Bic pantyhose? I mean, Bic is a lighter. Bic is a pen. So they put their name on pantyhose? The bottom fell out of this market in a big hurry. And then there's Pierre Cardin wine. Pierre Cardin wine? Pierre Cardin is a designer. I mean, I took this bottle of wine, I opened the bottle, I gave my wife a glass, she tastes it and she says, well, it tastes all right, but it smells a little sweet. Of course it's going to smell sweet. It says Pierre Cardin. Naturally, Pierre himself smells a little sweet. And would you believe Coors? Coors is a beer. Coors came out with a water called Coors Water. What do you figure? They wash the beer barrels and bottle the wash water? That doesn't make any sense. My favorite is Adidas cologne. Adidas is an athletic shoe. What do you suppose? They take those old athletic shoes and they squeeze the juice out of them to get Adidas cologne? And how about Chanel for men? Chanel is a perfume for women. Why would real men want to wear Chanel? And let me give you a specific example. 7-Up. 7-Up became the 3rd largest selling soft drink in America with 5.6% of the market. Not good enough. They wanted to increase their share. So they came out with Cherry 7-Up and 7-Up Gold. And then just to make sure that you can't exactly remember what to drink, they have the diet versions of those 3 products. So today, 7-Up's market share is 3.9% of the market. Does that make sense? Not to me. I mean, you go in a restaurant and say, give me a 7-Up, and the waitress says, would you like a regular 7-Up or a cherry 7-Up? Oh, I think I'll try a cherry 7-Up today. Would you like a regular cherry 7-Up or a diet cherry 7-Up? The heck with it. Give me a Coke. Would you like a regular Coke or a diet Coke? It is beginning to be hard to order anything today because manufacturers take their name and they put it on everything. Now, Let's take an example that people consider to be a real success, Diet Coke. Everybody says this is a tremendously successful product. It's the product of the decade. Well, there is a lot of Diet Coke sold, but you may not remember that the day Diet Coke was introduced, the Coca-Cola company had a Diet Cola. It was called Tab. And you know what? Tab was a big seller. Tab outsold Diet Pepsi by 32%. Now the market took off. The market exploded. But today, Diet Coke outsells Diet Pepsi by just 29%. You could argue that Tab is a better name than Diet Coke. Now another problem. You know, sometimes you're successful with line extension. Sometimes you're successful putting your name on a new product. Like, for example, Heinz was #1 in pickles. So they put their Heinz name on ketchup, and Heinz ketchup became the #1 brand of ketchup. But you know what? They lost their pickle leadership to Vlasic. Today, Vlasic is the #1 brand of pickle, 29% of the market, and Heinz used to be the leader with just 4% of the market. Now, one of the reasons that companies get confused about line extension, it tends to work in the short term, but not in the long term. It's kind of like alcohol, kind of like drinking, you know? Is alcohol a stimulant, or is alcohol a depressant? Well, in the short term, alcohol clearly is a stimulant. But you know, after you've had 3 or 4 and 5 or 6 hours have passed, alcohol is clearly a depressant. So too with line extension. In the short term, line extension can stimulate sales, but in the long term, line extension usually depresses sales. That's the law of line extension. You know what the most difficult job in marketing is? It's getting in the mind of the customer or prospect. But there is a law that can make that job easier. It's the law of candor. When you admit the negative, the reader will give you the positive. Take Volkswagen. Years ago, people wanted big cars. So Volkswagen admitted their car was small. They said, think small. That's a negative. But having said that, then they talked about all the benefits of having a small car. I mean, you use less gasoline, it's easier to park, it makes your house look bigger. So by admitting the negative, they were able to communicate the positive. And my favorite ad, the 1970 VW will stay ugly longer. I mean, yeah, it's ugly, but it's reliable. And maybe you remember that famous Rolls-Royce ad? At 60 miles an hour, the loudest sound in this new Rolls-Royce is the electric clock. They're talking about the clock being noisy. You know, after they ran that ad, the engineers said, let's fix the clock. No, don't fix the clock. I mean, having a noisy clock makes people think the car is quiet, and people think a quiet car is a quality car. Remember Avis? Avis lost money for 13 years in a row, and then they ran this campaign. Avis is only #2 in rent-a-cars. That's the negative. So why go with us? We try harder. Oh, that makes sense. If you're #2, you try harder. Some of the most famous campaigns in advertising history are based on negative ideas. Remember when Benson and Hedges launched the first 100mm or long cigarette? They talked about the disadvantages of Benson and Hedges. They had 2 guys talking. One guy smoking a Benson and Hedges, and he burned the beard of the guy he's talking to. And another guy gets in an elevator smoking a cigarette, the door's closed, cut the cigarette in half. The disadvantages of a long cigarette, Benson and Hedges. And Joy Perfume